How's it going, everybody? Just a little bit late because I was
Where's the
having
rabbi?
computer trouble. I need to
Good.
get one more light on here because I feel like I'm sitting in the dark. Incidentally, my grandmother, who died when I was very, very young, the thing that I learned about her more times than anything else was what her favorite joke was. And her favorite joke was, how many Jewish mothers does it take to turn on a light bulb? And the answer is, no, it's fine. I'll just sit here alone in the dark.
Right.
So, okay, as you can see, I have dressed appropriately for tonight's discussion. And you may think, oh, this is great. We get to like watch Star Wars with the rabbi and it'll be so relaxed and everything else. But really, we're going to talk a lot about Zoroastrianism and the Essenes and the Dead Sea Scrolls. So buckle up for some ancient Near Eastern fun. I will share a few things, and I want you to please go to the chat box where I will share a few things in quick succession. Number one, I'm not going to show it because it would take a large chunk of our time. But if you did not see the youth Purim spiel that was done this year, it is amazing. The YouTube link is now in the chat box. It's so good that if you left right now to watch it, I wouldn't mind. It's set in a Star Wars theme, and it's extraordinarily well done. And it's fabulous. So if you missed it, there it is. Watch now, watch it later, but definitely watch it. Number two, if you have not ever heard of Star Wars before, Star Wars is a movie series that evolved into an entire universe of movies, TV shows, novels, video games.
We still connected?
Shirts, etc. Yes, you are still here. Whoever that was, I'm not sure who it was. But if you've never heard of it before and you don't know where to start, you want to start with the movies, and the appropriate order, and this is not up for debate, is 4, 5, 3. Oops, I put 2 in. I got to start over. Okay. I'm going to not use Roman numerals. 4, 5, 3, 6, 7, 9. I still did it wrong. Oh my God. Anyone can unmute themselves, by the way. Okay, so if you want to jump in. But this is just me really showing that I don't just say that I'm bad with numbers. I actually am. So it's 4, 5, 3, 6, 7, 9. So basically, you want to skip 1, 2, and 8 completely. Never ever watch them. It will only make you a worse human being in terms of your value to the rest of society. And like I said, this isn't just my opinion, it's universally agreed upon. So on to the first thing to share, and just with a little bit of a caveat, I am going to be sharing a number of YouTube videos. So when I share them, the quality of sharing a stream of a video in Zoom is notoriously iffy. So it will come with video, it will come with sound. Even if you're dialed in on the phone, you'll still hear the sound. And for some people, it may be crystal clear. And for some people, it may be really jerky. And for some people, it may be so horrible you need to mute your computer. And that has nothing to do with how fast your internet is, or my internet, or anyone else's internet. It's sort of a randomized experience that we all get to go through together. But before I go into some of the actual learning content that will talk about why Star Wars is Jewish, this is a gem that I wanted to share.
You like the Yoda fight scene number 2?
Oh, there are certain scenes, like the Darth Maul scenes in Episode 1, I think are great.
Right.
You'd have to basically edit those scenes out and only watch them.
That's true.
And this doesn't even go into, by the way, because I'm such a nerd that I don't even watch the Star Wars original trilogy as it exists on any known legal format because George Lucas keeps tweaking the movies for some reason. So the movie that I grew up with on VHS, and the movie that anyone would have seen originally, was different than the first DVD, which was different than the second DVD, which was based on the re-release in the theaters, which is different from what's on Disney Plus because they changed it again. But if you go down a foxhole on the internet called Star Wars Despecialized, you can actually find a digital version of the original theatrical releases. But that's not what this evening is supposed to be about. So
important thing to remember is that Han shot first.
Yes, exactly. That's I think I have that shirt somewhere else. I just don't know where it is. So without further ado, I'm putting everyone back on mute for this video share. With sound. Optimize screen sharing for video clip. Okay, you are once again in a position where you may unmute yourselves. Now, why did I show that clip? Because it's kind of hilarious. However, it's not Hanukkah, but it does show how Jews can intersect with Star Wars, but just because Jews tend to like something in large numbers does not mean that that thing is necessarily Jewish. Although a lot of the things that we think are Jewish end up Jewish because of that reason. So like, you know, bagels and cream cheese and blintzes and lox and most Eastern European foods. They're wrong universe, Lynn, put your hand down. So, although this is on my desk at any given time, those are socks. So anyway. But that's cross universe. That's like it's like crossing the streams in Ghostbusters. It's just not done. So just because Jews generally like Star Wars, like most anybody really that gets into a fantasy universe, doesn't mean that it's Jewish. But there actually is a lot of Judaism in Star Wars, and it is not necessarily where you might think. So the parts of Star Wars that I want to focus on, and if you have no idea what I'm talking about, first of all, that's just amazing. But second of all, I'm sorry, because I don't even know how to start explaining this from scratch. But in Star Wars, it's a futuristic sci-fi setting, except there is one major fantasy element. So strict, pure sci-fi, by the way, means that there's no mystic, supernatural, anything. Everything has to follow science rules. It might get bendy with some supernatural sometimes, like Star Trek, but generally speaking, you know, sci-fi does not have any fantastic elements, but science fantasy will have both. So Star Wars is pure science fiction plus one fantasy element, which is the Force, okay? And the Force is a energy out there in the universe that certain people get to tap into, and the Force can be accessed through the light side and the dark side, and everything in the universe is connected by the Force. So just, you know, don't think too hard about the production quality. of what I am about to show because it's a little rough. But I'm going to show just a few seconds of a clip about Zoroastrian belief. And this is very, very important because Zoroastrianism has more than Star Wars being Jewish, Star Wars is Zoroastrian. But Zoroastrianism and Judaism have a huge amount in common because they are both really, really old monotheistic religions that come out of the ancient Near East. So, like I said, the production value of what I'm about to show will leave some things to be desired. But whoever put this together did a pretty decent job in getting the basics in. And this is just scratching the surface on what Zoroastrianism is, but it will have the part that is the most salient for this discussion. And if you have ever seen any Star Wars anything, some of this should sound familiar.
Zarathustra taught of a single god at a time when multiple gods were worshipped. This supreme power is referred to as Ahura Mazda. Zoroastrians also believe that this god controls the Asha in the universe, which is thought of as a vague force of goodness, righteousness, and illumination. This force, and Ahura Mazda who controls it, are thought to combat the evil and obscuring force Drudge, and the evil spirit Angira Mainyu, who controls it. Asha is often represented or seen as being fire or light, while Drudge is represented by darkness. This aspect of Zoroastrianism is why it is interpreted to be a dualistic religion, or one that leans on the notions of opposites in the world. It is also believed in Zoroastrianism that after death, it is decided whether or not
All right, and that's it. Now, I want to actually spend a little bit of time on that, even though we're going to be moving brusquely along. First of all, not sure if that video was understandable. Okay, so how similar is that to Star Wars, right? That person could have been describing Star Wars instead of a, 4,000 to 6,000 year old ancient Near Eastern religion that is still practiced, especially in Iran, because it was originally the Persian religion. Right, so there's this force out there in the universe, and there's a god of light that has the positive sides of the force out in the universe that is involved in creation and illumination and understanding. And then you have the dark side of the force, which is represented by darkness and controlled by the dark god. And it is, represents destruction and all of that stuff. So this basically is the essence of what the Star Wars theology is based on, is you have a duality in the universe that is inherently there, lightness and darkness. That goes into many, many, many ancient belief systems, because as human beings, there's day and there's night, there's good and there's bad. It's easy to look at the world in a dualistic way. And the Jewish approach to this is slightly different, because instead of there being a clear God of darkness and a clear God of light, we only have one God, period. And there's not even a entity that represents what the other not God force in the universe is. So what happens in Judaism is generalized chaos is the anti-divine energy in the world. So in the Torah, especially, you see this. God represents order and organization, and the mitzvot and doing the sacrifices correctly keep the order going. And chaos is the anti-godly force in the universe. So slightly different. But that would not fuel my argument that Star Wars is Jewish. Well, luckily, Judaism has been around so long that basically you can say anything is Jewish, and eventually somewhere you will find a group of Jews who have adopted whatever it is that you were claiming is Jewish. And that leads us to a conversation about the Essenes. Yay! Okay. Nod your head or give me a thumbs up if you have ever heard of the Essenes before. Okay, great. Now, when the Israel trip went, did you go to the Israel Museum in Jerusalem? And did you go into the temple of the book where they had the Dead Sea Scrolls? Great. Okay. So if you were on the trip and you went and you saw it, fabulous. If you've ever been to Jerusalem and into the Israel Museum, there's a giant building shaped like a Hershey's Kiss, and inside that building is the Dead Sea Scrolls that are on display.
Yeah, only a few of us went there, Jim.
Okay, I knew that a few of the people here were on the trip, but even a few people to have seen it in person.
Yeah, we took a walk on Shabbos.
Oh, I see, because it was on Shabbat, right? The Dead Sea Scrolls and the Essenes are connected only because the Essenes are a group of Jews that we know existed in the right time in the right place. And so we assume that they're the ones who went to a place called Qumran, which is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. So let me say this again. There is no proof that the Essenes are the group that went to Qumran and wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. But most people tend to agree that that's what they are because we don't have any record of the Essenes going anywhere else, and they must have gone somewhere. So you will hear me interchangeably use Essenes, the Dead Sea Scroll writers, and the people who wrote Qumran, and I'll talk about those as if they're all the same people. Other people would rapidly disagree with me. But, you know, they're not leading this Zoom, so too bad for them. Okay. Again, I'm going to show a few videos, but just like some snippets of each one. And what we're leading towards here is a specific scroll that I'll then spend a little bit more time on, because in the Dead Sea Scroll collection, you have a lot of copies of books that are in the Hebrew Bible and are written in Hebrew, and those are great. And they have some slight, you know, differences or whatever, but, you know, there's a lot of copies of Psalms, there's a lot of copies of Isaiah, there's some Torah sections and everything else. But we want to focus on one of the books that was in the Dead Sea Scrolls and not in the Torah. But first, a little bit of background information to get us there. And we are back into the screen share. Okay. Which one do I? Nope. 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 Yes. Okay. This is a fairly decent generalization of what the Dead Sea Scrolls are, where they were found, and who wrote them. And just, I hope that the imagery passes through, because this is, it just shows the beauty of this desert.
Qumran, home of one of the greatest discoveries of our time, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Hidden throughout nearby caves, they laid undisturbed for almost 2,000 years. Written by the Essenes, a Jewish religious group who lived during the Second Temple period, with a large community in the Judean desert near the Dead Sea. Discovered in 1946 by a Bedouin shepherd boy looking for his lost sheep, over the next 10 years, it became the largest collection of ancient Hebrew scrolls. Included in the discoveries were an unprecedented 39 copies of the Book of Psalms and 22 copies of the Book of Isaiah. The Essenes believed in keeping themselves pure from the outside world, living lives of voluntary poverty, collective ownership, and in serving each other.
All right, so I'm not going to go back to the screen. Okay, well, maybe I will go back to the screen. I'm going to go back to the screen. Hello, everyone. It's mostly for me because I want to see everyone's faces. I'm only going to say a couple things between these videos, and I should probably just keep the screen share up, but whatever. Why else are Star Wars and Judaism clearly like so interchangeable? Well, those images look exactly like Tatooine, which is where Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader are both from. So clearly, I'm not saying that they are part of the Qumran sect, but I'm just saying they could have been. If that sounded like a cult to you, That's because it sort of was. You know, shared ownership, insular community, voluntary poverty through no private property, totally self-contained, and they all mysteriously got wiped out at a certain point. All of the hallmarks of a solid cult. That, and they wrote down a bunch of stuff and then hid it in jars in caves for inexplicable reasons. No purple Kool-Aid, thankfully. Just the Romans who sort of cleaned them up as they were unifying Judea under their rule directly after 70 CE. So they write a bunch of scrolls and they put them in these caves. And like I said, a lot of them are books in the Hebrew Bible, but some of them are not. But they are written by a Jewish group in a close to biblical periods during the Second Temple period for sure. And they get into some really weird territory. And the book we're going to focus on is called The Sons of Light versus the Sons of Darkness, which again sounds exactly both like Zoroastrian theology and Star Wars. And this is where we really get Jewishness in a Star Wars setting. But I have to say, if you decide, oh, I want to learn more about the Dead Sea Scroll book, The Sons of Light versus the Sons of Darkness, then what's going to happen to you is you are going to walk into a weird door of strange end of days weirdness, because the Sons of Light during the War of the Sons of Light and the Sons of Darkness eventually has a final war of the Sons of Light and the Sons of Darkness until funding is created for a new trilogy. But the war that is depicted in this Dead Sea Scroll is an end of days level war. So modern end of days groups from various sects and religious backgrounds in the world all use the Sons of Light from the Sons of Darkness and the Dead Sea Scrolls as a way to intertwine the period of Jesus, a Jewish sourced book about the end of days, a divine war, and whatever their own weird belief is about the end of the world is nigh, et cetera, grab your sign and find a street corner. And just to show you a glimpse of that, I'm going to show you a few seconds of a video that is one of the top videos on YouTube. If you Google the Sons of Light and the Sons of Darkness Dead Sea Scrolls, and it will show you just how weird this particular topic can be when you get into the internet. Wait a minute, did I actually do a screen share? Yes, here we go.
The Sons of Light against the Sons of Darkness. Also known as War Rule, Rule of War and the War Scroll, is a manual for military organization and strategy that was discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls. The manuscript was among the scrolls found in Qumran Cave 1. The document is made up of various scrolls. 491, 497.
Please stop playing in the background, the horrible strange video.
The conclusion to this document.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry I inflicted that upon all of you, but I just wanted to show that like there's some real weird stuff out there with this. And I'm sure that all of you, just like me, enjoy, you know, finding very, very strange fringe groups of humanity and watching the videos that they then post online, because it's really, really weird. Now, we're going to go to a much more reputable source. I'm going to go directly to the website of the Israel Museum, which is where the Dead Sea Scrolls are kept. And we're going to look at their article about the War of the Sons of Light versus the Sons of Darkness. And then they posted a very sane comb video of one of their people doing a show and tell with that scroll. So here is another screen share, and I know it's a lot of screen share, so I just hope that the tech is as easy as possible for everybody. Now, this is just the main website of the Dead Sea Scrolls. within the Israel Museum website. And at the top of the page, they have an example of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And you look at this and you can immediately see that this looks very, very, very similar to Hebrew, but it's different enough to where you sort of need to know the specialized characterization to be able to sight read it. I am not able, for example, to really sight read this, even though I can recognize that it's Hebrew and I can recognize a lot of the letters. Now, they go through a lot of information. I mean, if you look at the bar here, just look how much information is on the website. But if we keep scrolling down past the history and we get into some of the distinct content, again, a lot of the content is pretty normal. There's other there's other scrolls that are not in the Bible. There's other religious scrolls. There are liturgical scrolls. So this is exact, some of these prayers and hymns and psalms, like Hallel, Thanksgiving psalms, that means Hallel, are the same as the ones that we currently have, but some of them are different. And then we have the self-contained War of the Sons of Light and the Sons of Darkness. And I'm just going to read a little bit of this. This is the day appointed by him for the defeat and overthrow of the prince of the kingdom of wickedness. The members of the community of the Yahad retired to the desert out of a profound conviction that they were living in the end of days and that the final day of judgment was close at hand. Once again, cult. They believed that all of the stages of history were predetermined by God, and thus any attempt by the forces of the Prince of Darkness and all the government of sons of injustice to corrupt the sons of righteousness was destined to fail. Salvation would ultimately arrive, as we read in Pesher Habakkuk. All the ages of God reach their appointed end as God determines for them in the mysteries of God's wisdom. So, and then it gets into even more of the divide between the two camps, the sons of light, who were good and blessed by God, and the sons of darkness, who were evil and accursed. And this was one thing to remember. The sons of light and the sons of darkness for the Essenes, or the people living in Qumran, they were not the Jews are the sons of light and the Gentiles are the sons of darkness. Anybody can be in either one of these camps. And what is really great here is, I think it's a good time to pause and talk about why this fits so neatly in the Star Wars universe. It's because Star Wars, especially the first movie, is written based on the classic hero plot line that is developed in the Greek period and then repeated throughout history. And the plot line is basically, you start with some young whippersnapper, whoever, and they're just as regular as absolutely possible. 9 times out of 10, they're a farmer in modern fantasy series. And guess what Luke Skywalker's was with his Uncle Ben? Water farmers. So then some external person comes up during a crisis and grabs the young person and says, you are the so-and-so of destiny and you have special powers. And then they say, you're crazy. And then the crisis ends up destroying the small idyllic world that the young man had been living in. So their family's dead, their place is dead. Now this, I'm describing 90% of fantasy novels right now. They go off with the person who found them. They usually have some trials and tribulations. They figure out what their power is. They have the moment where they master the power, find the sword, etc., whatever it is. And at the end, usually the person that found them and taught them all the things, their mentor, also has to die in order for the mentee to become the master and fulfill their destiny without being, without having a higher master of whatever it is that they're a specialist about still around to put them in the shadows, right? And then, of course, once they have come into their own, they save the day and light triumphs over darkness. And like, I mean, we could be talking about the Wheel of Time right now, and we would have the exact same conversation. Just, there are so many, especially fantasy, but also science fiction narrative blocks that are really based on this hero arc. And what George Lucas did is he created a new background on which to set that narrative. He did not change the narrative at all. That's why the first movie hangs together so perfectly. And if you take its plot line as an outline and you take the outline of a Greek hero arc, they are the same. So he created the characters and he created the universe and then used a foolproof narrative plan that has been around for millennia. And part of that universe is this light and darkness duality in a science fiction setting. And the other thing that I'm not going to talk about because it deviates from our topic, but the great thing that Lucas gave us with the first Star Wars film is the idea of used space. Because before that, most science fiction, when you were in a science fiction setting in the future and in space, space was very beautiful and clean and pristine and white and gleaming and glistening, right? Think Space Odyssey 2001. But Star Wars is like all of the technology is falling apart and everything is dirty and people are on like, you know, their hands are covered in grease and the Millennium Falcon is broken again. And so the idea of the future being a lived-in environment was just brought this whole thing alive. So back to the theology of this. The Sons of Light and Sons of Darkness in this book is exactly parallel to the Star Wars theme because you have the Jedi who are the Sons of Light and they use the light side of the Force. And then you have the Sith that are the bad guys and use the dark side of the Force. And they are in this eternal struggle. And I can truly say that about Star Wars because over the years, so many books, games, media, whatever you can think about have been created that use the Star Wars setting. They have stretched the Star Wars universe back thousands and thousands and thousands of years and even forward hundreds and hundreds of years. But one of the things that stays the same, even though a whole lot of the other stuff changes, is the nature of the Force, right? That is the same whether it's 3,000 years ago or 3,000 years in the future, is you have this source and it can be accessed through the light or through the darkness. The source is the same, 2 access points. We'll talk more about the Force and the theology behind that in a moment. So the next video that I'm going to show a bit of is a person doing some show and tell of an actual Dead Sea Scroll. So this is pretty cool.
Please follow me. You are now in the safe room. This is the place where we keep the scrolls that they are not on display right now. I want to show you one that is very, very special scroll. This is a fragment of the original wall scroll. This scroll, this is the original one, is one out of the 4 fragments of this marvelous document written in the time of the Romans, 2,050 years ago. And this manuscript describes the eschatological war between the Son of Light and the Son of Darkness, something that actually you know is the kind of story that we have in the Apocalypse of John in the New Testament. So if you take a look at this scroll, actually you'll discover the kind of stories that you have in early Christianity, and then you see how much Judaism and Christianity they have in common.
All right, no one is allowed to judge just how many SNL recommended videos came up at the end of that YouTube. Okay, so what we got to see there, and it's funny, even though right now he's in the humidity and pressurized everything room, he's still just briefly opened and then immediately closed because that is how sensitive these documents are. They were in this perfect preservation space, dry deserts, completely sealed jar in caves. I mean, they were protected. And the moment, and the initial caves, right, were some mistakes were made, but by the time that they had a system down, you know, they really knew that the moment they entered a cave and started moving these jars of scrolls around, they were immediately just fast tracking when they would be useless and just fall apart and crumble. So there are only fragments of the War Scroll, but they all support this duality of light and dark, and that there's a conflict, and you know, the light side is the one that we want to win. Now, the last thing before I close with just anyone who has questions, comments, share your most favorite Star Wars story. And obviously the reason that we're doing this is because today is Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. There is one Jewish philosopher that we need to take a look at, and his name is Baruch Spinoza. Now, Spinoza, other than being a dashing, doe-eyed gentleman, as you can see here, has a lot going for him, and a lot of unusualness to his philosophies, because he was the first modern Jewish pantheist. And I'll explain what all of that means in just a minute. But if you rewind to the first Star Wars film, and Luke has landed on Dagobah, and he finds Yoda, and they get through that awkward first interaction, and Yoda is now teaching Luke about the Force. And the Force is everywhere. The Force is within you, me, the rock, the tree, the space between all of these things. It permeates everything. It's what we're made of, not just crude matter. You know, we're all beings made up of light, made up of the Force. And it creates this wonderful picture of sort of everything in the universe being connected through the singular way. So Spinoza in the 17th century, basically, you know, he's a rationalist philosopher, which puts him at the front end of that. But he says to himself, we have this idea that God is one, and what can that really mean? And Spinoza decides that God is one means that everything in existence is interconnected in a way that makes everything God. So I'm God, the computer that I'm looking at is God, all of you are God, your spoon is God, the roof is God, the air is God, the squirrel is God, the chipmunks are God, everything is God, and everything is connected, and everything is part of divinity, and all of the universe is interrelated, because God is one means that everything is God, and if that's true, then all of the universe is really at one with itself. And that, if you take God out of Spinoza's theology and replace it with the Force, then Spinoza basically gives us the Jewish, you know, the Force theology, that God is the force that binds all of creation together. Now, a little bit of side background about Spinoza. No one liked his ideas at the time, but thankfully he lived before anything like fast-moving communications like telephones or the internet. So basically Spinoza would show up, and he was this brilliant, learned man, and he would become a teacher or a professor or found a school or whatever, and he would teach, and eventually he would start teaching his pantheistic theology. And people would get really upset because it was so different, and he would get kicked out or exiled from that community. So he would just pack up his stuff and then go to the next community and do the exact same thing until he was kicked out, and then he would go to the next community and it would be the exact same thing again. So Spinoza moves around a lot because basically nobody was ready for his radical theology yet, which ended up meaning that his ideas spread more than they would have if he was just in one place for his whole life. But instead, he moves around and also becomes an attractive figure for historians and Jewish history, because not only did he have new ideas, but he was a source of conflict. So I've thrown a huge amount of information at us, and I do want to take a few moments for just questions and comments and everything else. And now people may unmute themselves.
Rabbi,
Yes.
wasn't Spinoza excommunicated?
Yes, but each community could sort of do that on their own. And at that time, it was the excommunication was what gave Jewish communities power over the Jews in that community. Basically, we often think of Judaism pre-Enlightenment as, oh, well, everybody was just Orthodox, and that's not really true. But what is true in Europe is that the people who were in any given singular Jewish community, they could be forced to follow certain rules and guidelines consistently through the threat of expulsion or excommunication. Because if you were excommunicated from the Jewish community, you were still Jewish. So now you couldn't be a part of the Jewish community, and you also weren't really a part of whatever the greater community was. And yeah, so he was excommunicated multiple times.
Studied now as part of Judaism, like the Orthodox, or they still reject his view?
Not rejected. You know, he's one that you can study. Interestingly, philosophers and theologians are less denominationally bound study topics than things that have to do with mitzvot or halacha.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so questions, comments?
There's also some relation to the Gnostic idea of the urge and demiurge, the good and evil forces that created the universe.
Totally. In anything that has a dualistic approach, like, you know, they put the yin yang on the image for the Zoroastrian stuff. The yin yang isn't Zoroastrian at all, but it's the same idea, is that, you know, there are these two things. What is interesting about the Star Wars universe to me is that there is never a, oh, well, you can be in balance option. If you have access to use the Force and be a Force wielder, like a Jedi or a Sith, you have to either use the light side and be a Jedi, or use the dark side and be a Sith. You can't use both sides. And if you're particularly interested in this, the first script of the most recent Star Wars movie, the last of the new trilogy, the original ending to that was that Rey figured out how to use the Force in balance, and she was able to be a Force wielder that was equally using the light side and the dark side. And while philosophically it made for very interesting, like, reading as an idea, is I personally would have been furious if they had actually made that movie, because the whole point of the Star Wars universe is to force people to choose, that you cannot have both. And if you live on the light side, then you have to do things that are really, really painful, like not have possessions or personal emotional relationships, because those attachments lead to emotions that are the full range of human emotion. So basically, if you're going to use the Force in the Star Wars universe, you have to cut off a certain emotional aspect of what it means to be a human being. And that's the sacrifice of being a Force wielder. Whereas they were going to make Rey the first person who didn't have to make the choice, who could do both.
Well, technically, isn't there the idea of gray Jedi? I mean, just as a Star Wars aficionado myself, there's the idea of gray Jedi who walks between the lines, where there are people that have idealism of Jedi, but also draw on the strengths of their emotions.
Yeah, and gray Jedi are Jedi who leave the Jedi Order officially, and so then they don't have to follow all of the rules, so to speak. And then they from what I'm remembering though, and tell me just correct me, Jason, but they never present a fully fleshed out third option it's more like these characters will show up and show a concrete example of maybe the Jedi dogma is like on the overly protective side of dogma. You know, maybe you don't have to be so detached from everything. And then there's dark, I'm trying to remember, this is now, I'm pulling now from my childhood when I first played Knights of the Old Republic. But in that game, and what was very interesting about that game is later George Lucas canonized it and said that all of this is official. But they had dark Jedi. They weren't Sith, but they were like Jedi who used the dark side. So you do get that weird stuff in there.
But isn't Judaism focused on balance? You can't have one without the other. Star Trek is a much more Jewish approach to life.
That was actually my conclusion. Okay, so now I'm going to make my conclusion, and then we can evolve into complete chaos. So so Star Wars is Jewish in the sense of that pantheism is a pretty Jewish idea. It's been around since the 17th century in a modern way. It's definitely Jewish in the sense of like the idea of light. But the duality of light and darkness is actually only Jewish in certain like distinct corners of Jewish history. Most of Judaism does not see the world as light and darkness. It sees the world as like improvements or non-improvements, right? And it's about your behavior and not your beliefs or your emotions.
No.
And so like that is the thing where it diverges away from the Star Wars, you know, it's about your beliefs, mindset, emotions. Hold on just a second. You know, it's not even about your beliefs, it's not about your emotions. So what Star Trek does though is basically take the idea of learning and exploration and curiosity and the way in the morality in which we're supposed to treat strangers. And like, that's what all of the seasons of all of the iterations of Star Trek are about. And those are all super, super Jewish. Plus Kirk and Spock are both Jewish, so that helps a lot. Whereas I don't think any of the Star Wars cast is Jewish, except Driver. And you know, he plays the bad guy that redeems himself, so that's sort of Jewish, I guess. All right, thank you everyone for joining. A couple other quick things. This is the new early week format. It's called the Monday Mashahud. Mashahud means something in Hebrew, so it's the Monday something. Tomorrow morning at 9:30, we've got Rabbi Jeremy Borovitz, who is Rabbi Neil Borovitz, our emeritus rabbi's son, who will be logging in to talk about his experience being a rabbi in Germany, being a Hillel rabbi in Germany, and being a Hillel rabbi in Germany during all of this weird coronavirus crisis. So he will have a lot of very cool insight, and anybody can log on. This came out of a book group that was reading something that connects American and German experiences during different crises, basically slavery and the Holocaust. And that was what led us to him. But he offers a huge wealth of cool perspective, so you don't want to miss it. And for everything else, just keep your eyes on the emails. So happy Monday. All right, you may now unmute yourselves and say goodbye if you wish.
By the way, Jeremy is not a Hillel rabbi.
Bye.
I thought he worked for
Not Hillel. It's called.
Man, this thing really didn't have too much hours into it though.
Steve Berman. He's not Hillel.
It's
But
not
it's very
Hillel.
similar.
Do you know who's taking the letters for Barbara?
What
right.
letters for
Good
which
night, all.
Barbara?
Good night.
Bye.
Rabbi Jim, have you watched any of the canon like animated cartoons? That I mean, I don't know if
I am
so
actually watching
after
Clone Wars
childhood,
right now for the first time.
Hmm?
I'm watching Clone Wars for the first time right now.
Gotcha.
Well,
Well,
Jim show.
the last episode came out today, so as appropriately on May the 4th.
Yes, indeed. And many people are like, "Will you hurry up yet so that you can, like, so that I can talk to you about it?" And I'm like, "Dude, A gym show is a gym show, not gym, GYM. A gym show is a gym show because like it has to be a show that I really like watching, and I'm only allowed to watch it at the gym. Otherwise, I won't have this desire to go to the gym. And by the gym, I actually just mean the basement.
That's funny.
That's funny. I call my couch the gym. So.
Rabbi, weren't many of the science fiction writers Jewish, or the ones that have been responsible for the Star Trek?
Asimov is one of my favorite.
Excuse me?
One of my favorite people. Isaac Asimov is one of probably the most famous example of that, and he's one of my favorite writers.
He's one of Phil's favorites too.
Oh yeah.
Phil's a big science fiction fan.
It'd be a cool. This would be Jews and sci-fi would be a great, short multi-session thing. That I would definitely.
So,
like Robert Jordan.
Yeah. Wait.
So Rabbi, wouldn't some of them have taken some of their background? Rabbi, how much of their background as being Jews influenced what they wrote too, and things they've studied maybe in their childhood?
What's interesting to me is that some people, and not just sci-fi writers, but I mean like Jewish writers or producers of media, whether it's TV or whatever, some of them say my Jewish identity is a huge part of what I do, and you look at their content, and some of it seems very Jewish, but some of it doesn't seem very Jewish. Spielberg would fall into that category, right? He talks about being Jewish as a major part of his who he is and who he is as a producer of art, and you see that in his content a lot. But other people you don't. And one of the speaking of a sort of sideline Star Wars connection, Adam Driver, who was also in Black Klansman. In Black Klansman, he plays a Jewish character whose Jewish identity is not that important to them, but it becomes important to them as he realizes that in terms of the KKK, because he's Jewish, he might as well be just as Black as an African American.
He was a good movie.
Even though he personally doesn't see himself as that Jewish. And Adam Driver basically said in an interview that he sort of felt like that playing that role, because while he had grown up Jewish, it hadn't been a priority for his life as an adult, but then doing that role forced him to revisit that side of his identity. So it comes in personal ways sometimes, but I think you see it in the in the perspective of the overall novels. Asimov's a great example of that. Just like the perspective of the philosophies that book puts forward all feel very, very Jewish to me.
Ellison had a fantastic short story about a bunch of Martians trying to get up a minion. The deal was they were Martians. They were not humans, but they were Jewish, and the culture translated. So
that's hilarious.
It's a fantastic short story.
That's good. Only if they're male Martians.
I think they were.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks, Rabbi.
And tomorrow's 9:30.
All right. Does anyone want to go to breakout rooms? I should probably stop the recording because that.
Yeah, I think you should stop the recording. You're right.